Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Well, Elon Musk is now the richest person on the planet.
More than half the satellites in space are owned and controlled by one man.
Well, he's a legitimate super genius. I mean, legitimate.
He says he's always voted for Democrats, but this year it will be different. He'll vote Republican.
There is a reason the U.S. government is so reliant on him.
Elon Musk is a scam artist, and he's done nothing.
Anything he does is fascinating to people.
Welcome to Elon Inc., Bloomberg's weekly podcast about Elon Musk. It's Tuesday, January 14th. I'm Max Chafkin, in for David Papadopoulos, who's on vacation this week. We had big news break last night. TikTok is reportedly under consideration by Chinese officials to be sold or handed off. We're not totally sure what the terms of this would look like, to none other than Elon Musk. We're going to talk about the business implications, the political implications, and of course the implications for teenagers everywhere. And then, with the inauguration less than a week away, we're going to talk about the brewing feud between Steve Bannon, the kind of right-wing influencer and podcaster, former Trump administration official, and good old Elon. And to do this, we've got a great cast of characters for you. Kurt Wagner is joining us. He is Bloomberg's social media reporter and my favorite high school quarterback. Hey, Kurt.
Hi, Max. Thanks.
And later, Dana Hull, our Elon Musk reporter, and Josh Green, Bloomberg Businessweek political reporter, will be joining us to talk about political stuff. But Kurt, let's start here. There's some news, but to people who listen to the Elon Inc. podcast, it would have been a little bit familiar. I want to play a little bit of tape from our end of the year, our New Year's Eve special.
I just don't see that being that beneficial for Elon, like to have Truth Social. I think it's more likely that he will somehow end up with the US version of TikTok.
Kurt, this is why Sarah Frier makes the big bucks. Am I right? I mean, she called it.
Yeah, the pay grade is high for Sarah Frier for this very reason, right? She is seeing around corners that you and I can only wish to be seen around, Max.
Okay, so Sarah was suggesting that Elon Musk could somehow take over TikTok. Why don't you just break down what Bloomberg reported last night? I mean, this is big news in the world of business.
Yeah. So we are admittedly still a ways from Sarah's prediction coming true, but what we reported was that senior officials in China are basically game planning what do we do if the TikTok ban goes into effect, right? Which is supposed to happen this coming Sunday. And one of the options that has been discussed was the idea that, well, maybe Elon Musk would be a reasonable owner for this platform, right? And it kind of makes sense in a number of ways if you want it to. One is that he obviously already owns X. He has a very close relationship with incoming President Trump. So it, in all likelihood would be approved by the incoming administration, which is one part of this equation. But then he also has business in China, right, with Tesla, and he has a huge sort of foot in that country. And if you are the Chinese government and you say, well, is there someone we want to curry favor with, right? Is there somebody that we want to, if this has to be sold, if that's the only way for this thing to exist, is Elon Musk perhaps the most stomachable option for them, in part because they also maybe get some leverage in return? And so for all those reasons, it is sort of being discussed as a possibility. I want to be clear that this is not necessarily going to happen, that there's a whole bunch of other things that would have to happen for this to ever actually come to fruition. But again, senior officials in China sort of thinking about Elon as a possible owner of TikTok as a possibility.
Yeah, just to build on that for a second. So number one, BitDance, the parent company of TikTok, they are not directly controlled by the Chinese government. There is some question about whether, just because Chinese officials are talking about this, would BitDance do it? Although, as many people know, China's government has a huge amount of sway on its businesses. TikTok has actually called this report, quote, pure fiction, responding to a different news outlet. Kurt, has Elon commented on this yet?
I haven't seen him comment, but he did. Someone posted on Twitter last night that was like, here's all the TikTok users when Elon buys the company, and it was all these people like screaming and crying and being all sad. And Elon just responded to that tweet with the laughing face emoji, right? Like he didn't necessarily come out and say like, this is crazy, I would never buy it. He sort of like leaned into the joke, if you will. But no, we tried to reach out to Elon before publishing the story, as you can imagine, Max. We did not hear back from him or his representatives. So, but I think what you just said is important, right? Which is the role of ByteDance in all this. So ByteDance, of course, is the Chinese parent company of TikTok, and it has said it has no intention of selling this business. Now, I think where the Chinese government comes in is if the only way forward for TikTok to exist in the US is a sale, and if they want to sell it with the algorithm included, right? So that's the technology that sort of determines what everyone says. That type of sale with that type of technology changing hands would actually require Chinese government approval.
Kurt, how unusual is this? I mean, just from the outside, a world power sort of handing one of the most successful companies to a foreign, politically connected executive. Like, it sounds so crazy, but I mean, like, I guess the question is, like, how crazy is this? Obviously, Sarah Fryer predicted it, so it can't be that crazy, but still.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar of sort of a similar situation, certainly in like the consumer tech space, right? Like nothing like this has ever happened from a social networking standpoint. I can say that with a lot of confidence. I'm not like a geopolitical expert when it comes to China and trade and all of that stuff. So perhaps there have been other businesses where there's been discussions like this, but I think this sort of exemplifies a little bit about like what is so unique about our current moment in time, right? Like President Trump coming back to office and all of sort of the unusual or untraditional methods that he operates under, Elon Musk and all of the sort of chaos that usually comes with him. This ban that, we've been talking about for 4 years, but now is finally kind of coming together at this exact moment in time when there's a transition of power. So I do think that this is very unique, very, interesting time for both tech, but also geopolitics, as you point out. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, at least, that sort of rivals this moment for me.
Well, and as you hinted at earlier, it's hard to think of another prominent American chief executive officer who is as close to China as Elon Musk, right? He enjoys a very good relationship with Beijing. Tesla was able to open a car factory, quicker than anybody else. They changed the rules effectively for ownership of car factories for Elon Musk. So like you can imagine him being a person that both Beijing could get comfortable with and Trump. Kurt, what about Elon and TikTok? I mean, he has said in the past, unless I'm mistaken, that he wanted X to be more like TikTok. So it seems like there's really a lot of synergy with this proposal.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're Elon, this is like the biggest coup of all time, right? Like you suddenly get one of the most valuable, most exciting, up-and-coming social networks sort of gift-wrapped to you, right? And I think one element of this that we just do not know is, let's pretend all these stars align, Max, right? And the Chinese government says, hey, we want Elon to own this, and Trump says, hey, that solves our national security concerns, and Elon says, great. What does a deal actually look like here, right? Because we know that he has a ton of loans that he's taken out over the years that use his Tesla stock as collateral. He's obviously the richest man in the world. No doubt he could go out and find banks and other investors to help him finance something like this. But as we saw with the Twitter deal, it's not always like quite as easy as like, oh, he's super rich, he can totally do this thing.
Yeah, what would TikTok go for? Like what would be like a reasonable fair market value for Elon Musk to pay?
So I believe our analysts at Bloomberg have pegged the value of the U.S. business, the U.S. version of TikTok is somewhere between $40 and $50 billion. So this is not the kind of thing that you just like pop over to the bank and withdraw from your savings account to make this thing happen. So I do think that is a probably significant hurdle. You could imagine perhaps the Chinese government, again, if it ultimately comes down to them saying, hey, this is a deal, we really want this guy to have this, maybe they give him a sweetheart deal, right? Because they know in return they're buying sort of a relationship with Elon Musk that's even greater than the one, as you mentioned, that they already have.
I mean, you're using a lot of language that is going to set off alarm bells with critics, right? I mean, the prospect of this hugely successful social media company just being handed to Elon Musk, a politically connected both to the leaders of both countries. Like, I mean, sounds like just I don't even want to bring up antitrust, but like hugely problematic in terms of self-dealing, in terms of all the concerns that supposedly prompted Elon Musk to buy Twitter in the first place.
Yeah, well, I want to be clear. Like, I'm sort of game scenario planning here, right? What we know is in the story, which is what we talked about at the very beginning, Max, which is like these discussions are happening at the top levels of the Chinese government. That's really where we are right now, right? Everything else is sort of like a hypothetical situation. So I do want to be clear about that. But I also think it's fair for people to say, whoa, this feels a little bit questionable. This feels like a little bit, maybe even scary, right? Because it's not, as we've talked about on this pod and as you all have covered much closer even than I have, like Elon is someone who has relationships with a lot of world leaders, not all of them necessarily friends of the United States in the traditional sense, right? And so I think there is a feeling from some of Elon's critics in particular that like this idea of him having any type of advanced relationship with the Chinese government could be a questionable thing, a questionable decision for the Trump administration to make. So there's a lot that we don't know.
I mean, what happens now? What are you going to be watching over the next week or so as we proceed to the inauguration and then the deadline for TikTok potentially being banned from the U.S.?
Yeah, so I mean, the most immediate kind of domino to fall here is the Supreme Court ruling. So on Friday of last week, TikTok's lawyers and the U.S. government's lawyers argued before the Supreme Court about whether or not this ban should be upheld. We're still waiting for the court to ultimately come up with a decision on that. Now, the expectation is that the law will be upheld, the ban will be upheld, and we will then get to Sunday, this coming Sunday, the 19th, and it will go into effect, right? And so that will mean Apple and Google and Oracle, like the people who make it possible for Americans to download this app, taking it off of the App Store, no longer supporting sort of the cloud infrastructure for TikTok in the US. And then Monday comes along and President Trump is inaugurated, and suddenly now the ball is sort of in his court, right? This app has been banned. He said he doesn't want it to be banned. What can he do? We don't entirely know. There's a whole bunch of different sort of theories as to what he could do. Could he tell the Justice Department, hey, don't enforce this ban, right? Just simply let it happen and don't enforce the law? Could he convince, Congress to basically, somehow reverse this law in some way or tweak it so that it's delayed to the point where he can try to negotiate? So I think immediately it's Supreme Court. And then after that, it's a lot of we don't know, right? Because as the one thing we do know is that President Trump is a bit of a wild card. And so it's hard to sit here and really predict what he's going to do. But I think we have to get through the Supreme Court thing this week to really have an idea of what the other options really even are.
All right. Well, we'll be watching. Kurt, I assume we'll be checking in on this, as soon as next week, depending on what happens. Thanks again for joining us. And we'll see you soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, let's bring in Josh Green, Businessweek's political reporter. Josh, welcome to Elon Inc.
Good to be back with you.
And Dana Hull, Elon Musk reporter and podcast regulator. Dana, welcome to Elon Inc.
Hey, Max.
So, Josh, your book, Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency got into basically the rise of Steve Bannon and the influence he had on Trump and Trumpism. I want to play a clip from Bannon's War Room podcast from earlier this month in which Bannon attacks Elon. Let's give it a listen.
This is the United States of America. We're not going to be lectured by a bunch of white guys from South Africa. Don't need it. We love converts, but the converts sit in the back and study for years and years and years to make sure you understand the faith and you understand the nuances of the faith and understand how you can internalize the faith. Don't come up and go to the pulpit in your first week here and start lecturing people about the way things are going to be. If you're going to do that, we're going to rip your face off.
All right, so that's some tough language from Steve Bannon. Josh, what are the dynamics here? I mean, obviously Bannon doesn't mean it literally, but what does he mean?
I mean, look, Bannon, as I wrote in Devil's Bargain, Bannon was sort of the intellectual architect of a lot of Trumpism and kind of MAGA economics. He kind of pulled together this stuff into a philosophy and sees himself as the kind of high priest is that quote sort of reflected. The trouble with Elon from Bannon's standpoint is that he sees him as a threat, but also is kind of a useful idiot in terms of being able to, or being willing to donate to get Trump elected, to keep him in power, to help Republicans. The real fight, though, is that the central tension in the new Trump administration is shaping up to be between the Bannon camp and the Elon camp. That's the way I think of it. The kind of like analog 1.0 populist nationalists, the Bannon guys, and the kind of new breed of Silicon Valley right-wing provocateur Elon types, who include a whole crowd of guys, David Sachs, Vivek Ramaswamy, and others who are trying to put their stamp on the incoming Trump administration. And what Bannon's fulminating anger reflects is that there's a big kind of intellectual tug of war going on right now for who is going to control Trump, who is going to be in Trump's ear. And Bannon is doing everything he can to try and ensure that Elon does not become that guy.
I mean, these are basically the people who, as they see it, built the MAGA movement. And now there's this, new guy who put a lot of money up, but is a newcomer, essentially. It didn't believe any of this stuff until very recently. I mean, Dana, I'm kind of curious watching this, and particularly watching Bannon bring up critiques that we've heard of Elon Musk, but often from the left. Like, what do you make of what we've seen so far?
Well, I have to admit, and Josh, I'm so glad you're here. Like, I've kind of lost the plot on this whole Bannon-Musk feud, because I sort of see it as like, okay, you've got like Bannon and Laura Loomer and all these people who were like very central to Trump's rise in 2016, like in one camp, and then you have Elon and David Sachs and all of these other kind of tech bros as like the Johnny-come-latelys, right? Who are like, right. And so there's like a little bit of like, wait, like we were here first, like a tension about the newcomers. But isn't it also this big fight about immigration? Like, I thought that the whole H-1B visa issue was central to this feud. And I'm still stuck on like, I don't really know what Bannon thinks about H-1B visas. I mean, clearly Musk is very pro H-1B visa. His companies have thrived because of a lot of talent from elsewhere. Musk always says that like, it's like if you're fielding an NBA team, you want to be able to hire the best and the brightest. And so could you maybe walk us through a little bit why immigration is kind of central to this beef?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one way to think about it is that like there's going to be a years-long fight now in the Republican Party over what Trump does and what he stands for. And the fight over H-1B visas, it's kind of like the first shots at Fort Sumter in the Civil War. Like this is where the fight's happening first, but it's going to spread to a lot of other areas. So Bannon's complaint on H-1B visas is he is a nativist. He is a populist nationalist is what he calls himself, and he believes that immigrants should not be allowed to come in, including high-skilled immigrants, to take these jobs that ought to go to Americans instead. And one little twist Bannon has added lately, he spent 4 months in prison and befriended a lot of Black and Hispanic folks and said, if Elon weren't importing Indian workers, these are Bannon words, guys like I was hanging out with in prison, Hispanics, Blacks, would have the opportunities to become trained and hired as engineers. And essentially, Bannon's contention is that Elon and his crowd are screwing over hardworking American citizens and privileging foreigners because doing so makes it cheaper and more profitable for them to run their businesses. And to me, like the key quote from Bannon, he gave an interview, I think it was to Breitbart News about a week ago, that really kind of laid out his beef with Elon. He said, quote, "He will do anything to make sure that any of his companies is protected or has a better deal or he makes more money. His aggregation of wealth and then through wealth, power, that's what Elon is focused on," Bannon said. And I think that sort of reflects what's at the heart of a lot of these fights, that Bannon thinks Elon isn't a true believer and he's going to have this sort of death match with Elon to try and prevail and hold on to his influence with Trump.
I mean, the thing to me, H-1B has been basically like a tech lobbyist issue for a really long time because it's a way for big tech companies to get less expensive engineers. And big tech companies, including Elon Musk, right, have been complaining that they don't have enough engineers or whatever. So like it's kind of interesting because as much as Elon has adopted these sort of like super hard right positions. He at the same time this is going on, he's banging the drum on X about Tommy Robinson, who's, this very far right-wing British guy who's in prison now. Like, he's adopting some issues that are like kind of just normal, like help out my tech company type stuff. And that's what Bannon's keying in on.
Yeah, and I mean, the weird thing about all this is I did a story for Bloomberg News last week. I was part of a team that looked at Elon trying to extend his political influence into Europe, getting involved in politics there. And I ended up interviewing Bannon for the piece, and Bannon supports what Elon is doing in Europe. He said, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and therefore I'm foursquare behind Elon going after these kind of center-left snooty European governments, and I hope he puts as much, money and manpower and tech savvy into those as he did into the U.S. election. So, I think that Bannon views Elon as a threat, but he also views him as an instrument that he'd like to be able to wield in a lot of political fights, both in the U.S. and abroad.
Didn't Bannon kind of walk back some of his comments today at some kind of Politico event? He's like, well, he deserves a seat. He's earned a seat at the table because he stroked this big check.
Yeah, well, look, let's back up a little bit. We've talked about this on this podcast before, and be clear. Bannon was wrong about Elon Musk. I mean, he told me a year ago, 2 years ago, that Elon was never going to be a big player in right-wing MAGA politics because he was a cheapskate. As Bannon put it, he'll never stroke a check. Well, Elon ended up stroking a lot of big checks during the last presidential race and has promised to keep stroking them for all sorts of Republican incumbents, Republican challengers, to help Trump and Republicans maintain a grip on power. So Bannon has had to backpedal a little bit on that. And the fact of the matter is that the fact that Elon is willing to do this has really bought him a prime position in Trump's inner circle. I expected Trump to very quickly tire of Elon and his antics. And you get a lot of leaks from folks, and I've heard this myself, along the lines of, Trump doesn't want any co-stars. Trump is sick of Elon. I had a source in the administration the other day say that, Trump asked him if Elon was on the spectrum. And so you can tell there's an annoyance factor there. And yet, because Elon is both willing to give money and has this big and influential platform in Twitter and X, Trump doesn't want to throw him overboard. And so he's there and he's influential and he's someone that Bannon is going to have to contend with.
To me, one of the things that's been most interesting about this is the extent to which Bannon and Laura Loomer and some of these right-wing figures, they kind of have Elon's number. Like, they're bringing up issues that I think sting a little bit, right? Like Bannon and Loomer have brought up issues around China, Elon's proximity to Beijing, Elon's the history around Tesla. One of the things that Bannon has said is that, Elon's goal is to become the world's first trillionaire. And Dan, yeah. I'm kind of curious, do you buy that as a motivation? Is that his goal? Is Steve Bannon? I mean, he's a perceptive guy. He might be right about this.
Yes, but I think that people need to recognize that Musk is amassing all of this wealth for his number one goal, which is to get to Mars. And all of his wealth accumulation is really in service of the Mars mission, which has been the animating force in his life since he was 12 years old or 13 or whatever, and read Isaac Asimov. I mean, everything that Elon does is about getting to Mars. He is a man in a hurry. He really wants to get to Mars before he dies. He would like to, so it's all of this accumulation is in the service of that. It's not to be rich just to be rich. It's to be rich so that he can colonize another planet. And I think that you're looking at Tesla's stock price and you're looking at the valuation of SpaceX and you're looking at now, as we just had in our first segment, the possibility that Musk could buy TikTok in the US, and you're looking at, all of his other companies. And yeah, I could totally see it. I would be shocked if anyone else became the first trillionaire besides him.
So, Josh, let's talk about Doge for a second. I mean, this relates to the Bannon stuff. We've seen a couple of reports come out around Doge. One in the New York Times last night suggesting that Elon would have office space in the executive office building. Now, I'm curious, one of the things that Bannon has been railing about is kind of trying to keep Musk from having too much influence over Trump. Is this good real estate or bad real estate? How good is it to have an office in the executive office building? What does this tell us about how much influence Elon has and how important Doge is, at least in the mind of Trump and the people who are close to him?
Well, let's back up. It's good to have that kind of real estate because it means you're a short walk away from the West Wing and the president. And fights over real estate and access go back probably a couple hundred years in U.S. politics. Every administration is, everybody is jockeying to get close to the president. And that's especially true when you have a president like Donald Trump or like Ronald Reagan, who's particularly prone to listening to the advice of the last person to have his ear. And so Bannon's big fear, we talked about this the other day, he said, mark my words, Elon is not going to get a blue pass to the White House. A blue pass is the best pass. It gives you all access. It gives you drop-in privileges in the president in the Oval Office. Bannon doesn't want that to happen because he knows that if Elon is sitting there talking in Trump's ear, then Elon is the one with influence and Bannon is not.
Wait, so if you have the office in the executive office building, do you get the blue pass, or are there levels here?
No, that's separate. Look, the executive office building is the building kind of like it's a short walk from the West Wing, but it's not an office in the West Wing. I mean, what you ideally want to have is what Bannon had when Trump was first elected in 2017. That's an office in the West Wing of the White House, 10 feet from the Oval Office, where you can kind of drop in and you're talking to the president all day. You can control the paper flow of what he sees, presuming the president reads, which I guess we shouldn't presume anything. But in a normal White House, that's what you want, is you want to be able to control the flow of information. And that's the big concern that Bannon has with Elon, that if he's allowed to be in Trump's inner orbit, to have his ear, then he's going to convince Trump, as Trump said, a couple of weeks ago, I think that every foreign college graduate in the U.S. should have a visa stapled to his diploma. That's the kind of language that Steve Bannon and his ilk have nightmares about. That's the sort of thing that Elon's pushing for and that a lot of other people, frankly, would love to have happen.
Yeah, that's tech lobbyist language.
Well, tech lobbyist language. And, look, a lot of kind of, pro-business folks on the left and the right would love to have, more foreign educated students stay in the U.S., help grow U.S. productivity. But it's absolutely not what a Steve Bannon or a Stephen Miller wants to have. And so the fact that Doge is going to be in the executive office building means it's sort of a formal designation. You're part of this administration and you're very close to the West Wing, but you're not all the way into the West Wing. So there's still going to be a question of, is Elon going to do what normal EOB workers do and get your coffee at Starbucks every morning and sort of trudge up to your office and work there all day? I kind of doubt it. So, I wouldn't read too much meaning into where their office space is going to be, but again, it's another kind of move on the chessboard of Elon trying to get closer to Trump and Bannon trying to checkmate him and sort of knock all his pieces off the table.
But Elon is close to Trump. Elon has been camped out at Mar-a-Lago, renting some little cottage, right there in Palm Beach. He's constantly flying back and forth. He's been at Mar-a-Lago ever since the election, and he'll probably be at inauguration on Monday, I would assume. And they talk to each other directly. There's no intermediaries between Elon and Donald. They are texting each other and talking to each other all the time. So isn't Elon Musk closer to Trump than Bannon is at this point?
Yeah, look, I think what happens when a president goes into the White House is that the situation changes. The people around him are very, very tightly controlled, not just by the Secret Service, but, if Trump needs to go down to the Situation Room, Elon can't just sort of follow him in. There are rules that even Trump and Elon can't flout. And a lot of the challenge for Susie Wiles, President Trump's incoming chief of staff, is going to be, and this was true in the last Trump administration, controlling who has access to the president. If you let enough crazies in there, if you let Laura Loomer in there, if you let Rudy Giuliani in there, if you let all these kind of wacko election denialists, who were in there kind of causing chaos last time around, then things pretty quickly go off the rails. And that's not what the kind of serious people in Trump's orbit want to happen. It's also not what Bannon and the MAGA hardcore people want to happen. So it's not going to be quite as easy for Elon to drop in on Trump in the White House as it is in Mar-a-Lago, where there's kind of an open door policy and any rich person or celebrity can just kind of come traipsing in and chat up the president. I think it'll be a little tougher this time around.
I just want you to know, both of you have access to me unfettered anytime.
To Max.
I will pick up the phone. Blue pass to my intellect. finally, we're going to have an update from the world of sports, esports, actually. We talked about Musk's very, very high ranking in the game Diablo 4. Josh, this may come as news to you, but he has apparently spent a huge amount of time playing this video game, playing video games. He streams video games. And during our year-end specials, Ryan Broderick, our guest, suggested that Musk might have a ghost player. He might have someone essentially juicing his video game stats, getting him better in the ratings so he could look better in the world of Diablo. Now, there's news here. There's a news development, and I just didn't want to let this podcast end without bringing it up. So Musk streamed himself playing another game. It's called Path of Exile 2. And it basically, he was sort of clumsy about it in a way that sent a bunch of content creators into a frenzy. The sort of leader of this, of these whistleblowers or would-be whistleblowers was a guy named Quinn69TV. Quinn69TV identified behavior that seemed inconsistent with having reached such a high level. Dana, I just got to ask you, is Elon Musk doing video game doping?
Wow. Well, this is the investigative reporting line that I think we have to really put at top of mind as we head into 2025. I mean, Elon is a gamer, right? He's always been a video gamer. It's how he unwinds. I mean, a lot of his references are to video games. He is fundamentally a 13-year-old boy in terms of so much. It wouldn't surprise me, but I don't have definitive proof. And I think that he often plays video games when he's on his plane and at weird hours and he's streaming because he's trying to gain impressions and make X be this big thing. And so there's a lot of motivations as to why. But yeah, I don't have definitive proof. Just like I don't have definitive proof about Adrian Dittman.
Josh, if this scandal proves to be true, how damaging do you think it'll be to the incoming administration? I mean, is this going to be the thing that finally does Trump in after all these years?
Yeah, this will be like Watergate for sure. No, I love the fact, by the way, that there's video game truthers out there kind of examining his playing style and drawing these conclusions about what's real and what's not real. But I don't know, maybe Congress can appoint a special panel to investigate and get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the problems with Elon controlling Doge. This would be a perfect problem for Doge to tackle. But anyway, yeah, I tried to dig into this and honestly did not know enough about the world of virtual goods to be able to evaluate the claims. But listeners, we can promise you we will be following this story. And, if you have thoughts about this or any of the more serious topics we discussed on the podcast, you can email us, Elon Inc. at Bloomberg.net. Josh, Dana, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This episode was produced by Stacey Wong. Anna Mazarakis is our editor, and Rehan Hermansi, our senior editor. The idea for this very show also came from Rehan. Blake Maples handles engineering, and Dave Purcell fact-checks. Our supervising producer is Magnus Henriksen. The Elon Inc. theme is written and performed by Taka Yasuzawa and Alex Seguiera. Brendan Francis Newnham is our executive producer, and Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts. A big thanks to Joel Weber and Brad Stone. I'm Max Chafkin. If you have a minute, rate and review our show. It'll help other listeners find us, and we will see you next week.